Okay, welcome to the show. I wonder if you heard that. Did you just hear that?
I did, yeah. Meeting
That's
is being
really weird.
recorded.
It's the first time I've ever heard that on a recording in like 8 years. So anyway, yeah, it's being recorded. Who knew? How do I normally start this? Okay, welcome to the show. My name is Paul Burgess, and I'm here today with, I'm going to call him a good mate of mine, but even though I haven't seen him for about 3 years probably, Pete Williams from Functional Medicine Associates, which he, as I understand it, set up and created and is the mastermind behind the whole project, right?
True, yeah. We are sort of rather well-established central London practice now. Whether we're going to keep it that way with COVID and those pretty huge central London rents, we're not too sure. But that's a conversation we're going to be having together over the next 6 months, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of it's gone online.
Absolutely, yeah.
Loving that stuff. And we are going to talk today about oral health and how much of a massive missing piece to a huge amount of puzzles it is, and no one's really talking about it of significance. No one's really bringing, people aren't really even hearing about this kind of stuff. And we spoke before our lovely lady told us we'd started recording that we spoke about this about 3 or 4 years ago.
We did, yeah.
When you first started having an inkling into it and saying, you know what, I think there's some traction here and there's some benefit to this kind of thing. And then fast forward, we're in a position now where you've really run with this and created something quite useful and spectacular out of it. So, Mr. Williams, take it away. Tell us all about it.
So shall I start where I'll tell you where we'll start, and I'll sort of exposing my age. This all started for me about 45 years of age, so nearly 7 years now, where I started having a problem with a back tooth. And listen, I was a regular dentist go before this, regular hygienist go before that. And so anyway, this back tooth was bothering me, and so I went to the dentist, and she said, it's going to have to come out, Mr. Williams. I said, well, okay, fair enough. I've got a good set of teeth. If I'm going to lose one, it's no drama. And I said, so, what's wrong with it? He says, well, you have got pretty well-established periodontal disease. And so I think hit me in two fronts. Number one was, oh my God, I've got a disease. And then number two was, I didn't even know what periodontal disease was. So that was, I think that was more the embarrassment and the shock of, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, really. And here's probably a disease in medicine that actually I was embarrassed to say that I had very little idea on. And so, of course, huffed and puffed, left the consultation. And that was 7 years ago. And as you say, Paul, we talked probably about 2 or 3 years ago when I was several years into it. And the science on oral health, and I think more importantly, how it affects systemic health and how it relates to disease is overwhelming. I just want to give you some recent figures from a 2021 paper that was in Nature Reviews, really just looking at oral health and how it influences systemic health. You're 3 times the risk of obesity with poor dental health, gum disease is 3 times. So you're 3 times more likely to be obese because you've got problems with your gums and periodontal disease. There is some talk that your risk of Alzheimer's increases by 70% from having poor oral health. We're certainly looking at least 25% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Yeah. And the list goes on. We know things like type 2 diabetes and controlling type 2 diabetes. If you haven't asked your patients or had a conversation with regards to oral health, then we know that type 2 diabetes and periodontal disease are bidirectional relationships. One is driving one and one is driving the other. So again, once I started digging into this, I started to actually think about patients that have obviously come through the practice over the years where, I've done a good job, but maybe, not the results that I would hopefully wanted to achieve. And that's because I never asked the question. And I never asked that question about, what's your dental health? And that opened, as you say, a whole new rich data source of really understanding how oral health impacts and drives and can be not only associated, but in many ways causal in many of these chronic diseases. So for us now at Functional Medicine Associates, it's absolute standard of practice that we not only ask what is going on from a point of view of your historical history with dental health, but we actually take the second and third steps, and that we do all the investigations. So, we're doing a lot of oral diagnostics. We want to look at, and we've done two things, as you know, Paul. We are heavy users of understanding the oral microbiome, and we do a lot of testing around that, but in particular testing for oral pathogens, because again of their association, and I'll go on to explain that. But I think more importantly, I've been on a sort of 2-year mission to have an oral genomics panel built. And that's just about to come to fruition. We're going to be rolling that out from the end of June, we think, pretty much. And so over these years, what we've been able to do is actually, and something I've wanted to do, and I say this because we're just seeing some profound changes, more than I would ever expect. We've had one of our case studies has just been given the go ahead to be presented at the big IFM conference in June. So myself and a functional, and again, interestingly, which I'll get into, myself and a functional dentist. So I've worked on a patient, and we've completely put her seemingly unrelated disease, which is rheumatoid arthritis, pretty much into remission from really aggressive rheumatoid as well, because we answered the question when we asked the question about her oral health. And of course, she was under another really good FM doc for about 6 months, very comprehensively looked at and treated, but didn't really change her symptoms at all. And I just look at that one and think, well, that's because he didn't ask the question, and I did. When she came to see me, we asked the question. We literally changed it around in 12 weeks. So we've taken her from really active rheumatoid arthritis, from a disease process, to pretty much in remission in 12 weeks because we asked the question. We got a dentist who understands the joined up thinking, as we're all moving to. And we worked on, that was the keystone for me. The keystone was her, if you like, her oral health was the key to what was setting off all these symptoms. And again, when you look into the literature with regard to rheumatoid arthritis and periodontal disease, again, very, very similar disease driven by very similar genetics and very similar underlying mechanisms. So our case study paper for the IFM conference was entitled Periodontal Disease and Rheumatoid Arthritis, Killing Two Birds with One Stone. And I think that's, and yeah, you know what, it's a case study, it's an N of 1, but within 12 weeks, we've done some pretty significant work with this lady. And again, so much so, as you say, that the IFM have said, yeah, this looks good, we're going to accept you as a case study for a poster study. So we know we're doing good stuff. I mean, this is what's been happening for us in clinical practice now for several years. And of course, the whole point about that, and we've called the oral genomics panel DNA Smile. And what we've done is that we've built an online course to be certified, which I can go in and explain what we've done on that if you would like.
Yeah, so we'll chat about that in a moment for sure.
Okay, so I think, as you say, what we've identified, and again, probably luck of the draw and embarrassment from the fact that I was so embarrassed when I left the dentist's chair that time, that periodontal disease, I just wasn't really sure what that was. That's brought us into this position where I think we're doing some field leading work with regards to understanding where that fits. And again, it's just that same thing. It's like, yeah, but we haven't asked, these cases come in all the time. We're just like that. What's your dental health? And you realize it's pretty poor. And then you realize, I suppose some of the other aspects of how, certainly at our practice, we're looking at patients now. And so obviously we get lots of patients who come into us, who've been to see other people before, been heavily tested conventionally. And sometimes they've, again, just been looked at we look at them in a slightly different way. And we're looking at them through some of the new mechanisms that we're learning about disease. Number one, you know, if humans are more bacteria than human cells, which has been proved, we're slightly more bacterial cells than human, then it would be logic to ask the question, what's the health of your bacteria? Because of course humans are holobiont, so we are sort of we're a superorganism. We are a combination of fundamentally bacterial cells and human cells living in this human body as a sort of vehicle. And of course, number one, we want to get on because we want a nice place to live. And so one key aspect to the health of you is making sure that the health of your bacteria, wherever it is, I mean, we've identified that there's bacteria pretty much on every single surface of your body, dominated through the oral tract. And so, you know, at Functional Medicine Associates, we ask those questions sometimes. It's like, yeah, but no one's asked about the health of your bacteria, and maybe that's where we start. We're also very keen, and I'm very keen on some of the other mechanisms that we're learning with regards to why oral health and gut health is so important. And that's the mechanism of bacterial translocation. And so what we're talking about there is that what happens when bacteria that should be in certain places have the opportunity to get inside the body. And this is the key aspect with regards to, I suppose, a leaky gut, or, you know, leaky gums, and, you know, a leaky brain, is that we have these borders that protect us from the outside world. You know, the brain has a blood-brain barrier. You know, our mouth has our gums, and they should be protecting us. And our GI tract has a GI tract. But when those borders get more permeated for whatever reason, you have a risk factor then that you have armies of certain things, and probably dominantly endotoxins and bacteria that can translocate from one localized area to another. And then suddenly, and let's give you an example of that. Let's give you an example of, again, if we're talking about cardiovascular disease, how certain bacteria, certainly oral pathogens, maybe like Porphyrovirus gingivalis, can slip through. And when we're talking about gum disease, mate, we might be talking about gum recession. We might be talking about irritated and inflamed gums. We might be talking about bleeding gums. When, you know, you clean your teeth, you spit it out, it's a bit of blood there. These are active indicators that all is not well there. And when that gets more pronounced and you start getting these periodontal pockets, and again, what we mean by there is when your gums start to come away from your teeth, you're starting creating these little hideouts for these bacteria to start populating, to build lovely biofilms that are very difficult to get rid of, and also give them an entrance inside the body. And when they translocate, you know, you can start to, and they can go anywhere. This is the point. And this is the scary thing for me in particular with regards to Alzheimer's, because this translocation of certain oral bacteria are being found in Alzheimer's brains. And that's pretty scary, because what that's saying is bacteria that are pathogenic in your mouth have somehow got into your body and have ended up in your brain. And of course, what we're understanding from Alzheimer's, the proteins that in the end that we're looking at, the amyloid plaques and the tau that really are involved with the destruction of the brain, are actually the ones that are trying to prevent the problem. They are almost like your brain soldiers protecting against invaders. But this is what it comes back to about borders. If your border is always compromised, whether that's orally, gastrointestinally, or with blood-brain barrier, your brain, those proteins are always going to have to try and defend you against it. And so we're learning, particularly in Alzheimer's, that it's less about, you know, is this about ApoE4 genotypes? It's certainly still a player, or is it also about how we defend from the outside world? How does that blood-brain barrier try to defend you? And if it's always compromised, then there's always going to be a fight. Yeah. And so, you know, they are the main mechanisms, this bacterial translocation, I'm very interested in, because of course we just see it all the time. You know, we're just seeing that when you see when you see something that gets inside, your immune system has to respond. That's its job. But it responds, of course, in increased inflammation, increased autoimmune activation, and oxidative stress. Everything that you don't want. Yep. Well, you want for a very, very, very short period of time, and then that needs to calm down. But if that is always happening, Paul, you're going to have these people who are just sort of chronically inflamed and accelerating every single disease process that you can think about.
So there's so much there to cover. Firstly, I do remember many years ago it being quite well established that gum disease has a direct effect on cardiovascular risk. And
Absolutely.
I remember speaking to a patient a few years back, and just by looking at him, I'm, kind of like, when was the last time you went to the dentist? And I remember his reply, it was, oh, don't you know, it's a big con, that is. I've not been for 20 years. I went, okay, well, here's some information. Cardiovascular disease, gum health, kind of intrinsically linked. And he even made a comment that his gums bled when he ate a banana. That's how bad they were. And it's consequently, to be fair, he went on and had an awful lot of work done, got them massively repaired and fixed, spent an awful lot of money, and was in a good place with it. But also, and I don't have the paper to hand, and I should have dug it out before we started, but I'm sure I read something recently that said, even just by brushing your teeth in the evening, people who miss that evening toothbrush, brushing their teeth, had worse insulin sensitivity the next day. So by making sure you brush your teeth in the evenings as well as the mornings, it actually had an effect of improving your insulin sensitivity, which I thought was quite interesting, because Alzheimer's is very much driven by insulin.
Absolutely.
So the whole thing is together. And then finally, the point you made about the body being under such an assault of issues with inflammation and oxidative stress and so on, the oral microbiome and where that, gum disease and everything else is affecting us is in excess of or on top of the mold and the maybe heavy metals and environmental toxicity and everything else that you've been harboring in your tissue for so long. And none of it's being looked at in real depth. But it's not uncommon to get a mold, environmental toxicity, heavy metals test done and potentially do some work on it. But there's nowhere that does the oral stuff quite the way you're talking about. And if I'm not being funny, right? If it is like as effective as you say, and when I say if, it's almost as though I'm questioning you, and I'm not, because I believe in your work 100%, and I know how conscientious you are about what you do. But being as it is as effective as it is, when this call finishes, I will do that course whenever it starts, and I will add that straight into my pre-testing for any patient that comes in, because it's a massively important area we're not looking at.
Yeah, so I think sometimes I look at sort of my journey through functional medicine, and I was a very early adapter of it, and that's, I suppose, had probably more pros now, but there's been a lot of cons with that, and there's been a lot of, and still actually, if we look, we are where we are with how I think now. You just, 25 years in, your thought process and thinking process with patients is completely different as far as how you would look at a patient. So you're going to look at a patient differently. And whilst that's been, incredibly helpful and insightful, because you're just going to look at a patient in a very different way, you're also waiting for people to catch up. So what we're doing, it's a chuckle, isn't it? Because, I think COVID maybe has brought us into the fact that actually we should be taking a little bit more vitamin D or getting out some more sun, and, we were talking about that 25 years ago. And so I just think, if you look at the literature on oral and systemic health, it's been there for 25 years. So it's not that we're reinventing the wheel. I think what I've been able to do is, because I think slightly differently and I've had the experience, and then and also, to be fair, I've had some patients where I haven't done as good a job as I should have, because I just didn't know. And now I know. I'm just like, oh Christ, I wish I'd had so-and-so again, because that would be first port of call. And what I would say on that, certainly on it being standard of practice, it almost feels like, Paul, it's malpractice if you're not asking now. Because, again, let me give you some examples. An obesity patient, 3 times more likely. I can't not ask that question. And I can't not identify that. And as you know, obesity, yes, we can look at it, but it's fundamentally driven by inflammation. And if you've got periodontal disease, it's fundamentally driven by inflammation. And so I'm looking at this going, well, what is one of the major root causes of why that might be going on? And when we need to get that down, because if you can't control the periodontal disease, you won't be able to control any of the other systemic diseases that are developing, because they're all being underpinned by similar genes, but very much similar underlying mechanisms, which are going to be immune activation, which are going to be inflammation, oxidative stress, which are running all those chronic diseases. And so what I've looked to do over the years, based on the experiences we've had, based on how we understand the science and also how we're implementing it, is that sometimes you get a patient, I mean, that rheumatoid one that we're going to be having presented at the IFM conference, it was just almost like just a beautiful example of, and if anyone takes anything away from today, is that you've just got to start asking the question. Because if you do that, it's going to lead you down a completely different way of how you're going to strategize, how you're looking at patients. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you don't have the fully integrated picture, but for a lot of these patients, it is, wow, this is just like there's a massive war going on there, and we've not even thought about it. And until that war is understood and calmed and controlled, we're always going to have problems elsewhere. And this is what the fundamentals of what the DNA Smile training is going to do. What I wanted to identify is and this is where the genetics consultants have been brilliant, is that what I'm saying, we need to identify which are the most predisposing genes to increase periodontal disease, both from an innate immune aspect and an acquired and inflammatory aspect. And so, because what we're learning, I think, with periodontal disease is like COVID is a good example of this, and so is obesity and type 2 diabetes. And then you can start to see already how these are linking, is that they are underpinned by pro-inflammatory genetics. And what I mean by that is that what we've looked at is the genes around ones that are going to cause your immune system to overreact. So we're looking at people whose immune systems are actually, Paul, a bit too bloody good at their job. Yeah. And so they love a scrap. They can't wait to have a scrap. They overreact having a scrap, and then they don't like turning off. And so this is fundamentally what we've been finding on case studies, that the ones with the most advanced.
It's a bit like you out on a Saturday night, right?
Well, I like to say, I use the analogy because, again, what we've got to be able to do, haven't we? We've got to consistently be able to translate this into the patient story. Yeah. And so I'll say to him, I said, look, that lady
again. So yeah, we had a thunderstorm and we lost Peter, bless him, because he got very scared and hid under a table, and he doesn't like lightning and thunder like you do. But he's back now. He feels better, and the whole lot basically stopped. So apologies to people listening, but we're back and we're going to talk about the course that.
So, and I just remembered what we were talking about actually before we went.
Well then,
it was all about. What do I think that we've been able to do with the course? And I think what does 25 years of being in functional medicine give you? Well, it gives you a different way of thinking about things, but it also gives you this, I think we can all recognize in medicine that a lot of maybe what is people find, like vitamin D is a classic example of, I'm not so sure you should be giving that to people. But the reality is that the evidence has been there for 30, 40 years. And so with what we've done with DNA Smile again is that you can't ignore what the evidence is telling you. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. It's like, holy cow, how can you can't ignore it. And one of the key things about this, Paul, is that where we think DNA smile and where I think this is going to explode is actually in dentistry. So I've been working well, let me take a step back. I got asked to speak at a dental conference about 3 years ago. And so I did a conference speech on how we looked after a patient, of course, with oral diagnostics in there. We hadn't done a DNA smile by there. And it was literally one of those where I'm speaking to a group of dentists and the jaws were on the floor, because suddenly it's like, right, okay, so this guy's fixing it all together. You can understand how oral health is affecting pretty much every pro-inflammatory disease that we can think about. And that snowballed where now I'm regularly speaking, and one guy in particular, to some of the, I suppose, the most well-known mercury-free and biological dentists, not just in Europe, but worldwide. Because one of the other aspects that I wanted to do with DNA Smile, and we've got 2 DNA Smiles, we've got DNA Smile and then we've got the add-ons. And what I wanted to put in the add-ons was ApoE4, the lipid genomics on that one, detoxification, because I want to be able to give people who, are sort of having that conversation about, should I take my mercury fillings out? That what we're doing there is saying, well, I think in my perspective, should people have mercury in their mouths? No. And I think even the FDA now in the US has basically said that susceptible genotypes probably shouldn't have mercury in their fillings. And so, if you're an ApoE3 or E4 or 4/4, you definitely shouldn't, in my opinion, should be having mercury in your mouth, because the potential risks for that as we going forward. Paul, sorry, let me just turn my mail off so that it's not going to make that noise. Apologies.
All right.
And so not only what we're doing on this is that I'm not only looking at this from the point of view of, if I'm a functional medicine practitioner, how should I be looking at this patient? I'm also trying to bring this into dentistry with these guys to say, and try and bring practitioners to give their patients the sort of more scientifically grounded opportunity to say, yes, mercury in your mouth is probably going to be more problematic than in someone else. And so we want to be able to get to that position to say, yeah, this is something that that you probably should and would need to do. So, I've got a patient at the moment, ApoE4, E4 genotype, so significant risk for Alzheimer's, significant periodontal disease, and significant fillings. Is that something we might need to think about if she's asking the question? I think the answer to that is yes. I think we probably, am I at increased risk? Definitely. And so we're doing a lot of work with the dentist as well, which is fantastic. Some of the strategies that they're using, localized sort of antibiotics in the pockets, brilliant stuff. And so it's opening this new world. And one of the key things that I would say to this, that anyone who wants to do the training, I will firmly say you're going to open a completely new revenue and referral scheme, because dentists are all over this. Yeah. They're desperate. And what they can't do, Paul, is there are parts that they cannot do legally that you will be doing. Yeah. And so you start forming this relationship with dentists, because I'm sending people to dentists, they're doing their job, and they say, well, you have a look at so-and-so, and you've literally got a new revenue stream. So I think that's the other fantastic thing.
I think the challenge a lot of people have got to realize is that you can't go to what I'm going to say is a regular dentist. They do need to be a biological dentist that understands how to remove mercury without making the problem worse. Because a lot of people, if they're just going to drill it out, you're going to have a lot more challenges to face.
And so this is where we're trying to, what I've been working on the last 6 months is trying to build this step-by-step algorithm from almost the patient experience, so that in the end, in the next few months, we'll be able to give to the practitioner who's done the course, here's your script. Does your patient have amalgams? Have they had their ApoE4 genotype done? Have they got the genomics? They will probably likely be the ones that you would add on to DNA Smile, because of course, this is a conversation many of us are having in this integrated world. And as you say, now the FDA in the US have recently come out and said, probably susceptible genotypes shouldn't be having amalgam fillings.
Okay, so a couple of questions then. Firstly, periodontal disease, from my understanding, which is very basic in this area, the oral microbiome has a big part to play in keeping that under control, and
Yeah.
some of the knock-on things. So when a baby is born through the birthing canal, naturally, they tend to pick up a lot of bacteria from the mother through that birthing process, and that starts their GI tract, so we're told, right? The microbiome. Where does the oral microbiome initially get established? What does that?
So,
is that at the same time?
It's the same time. And here's how I try to tell the story, is that your GI tract starts at your mouth and it finishes at your bum.
Yeah.
And so for me, there is no difference. That is your GI tract. It's just that there are different components and parts of it. What I would say about the mouth, the oral microbiome is the second most diverse. But the thing about the oral microbiome, it is the first point where humans essentially sample and taste the outside world. And so it's a crucial battlefield. Yeah. And this is how I look at it. It is absolutely crucial that you're understanding the army that protects you there, your immune system. This is what the oral genomics do. And who is on the battlefield. So I tell the story about the battle for Helm's Deep, that sort of, if you can remember that massive battle scene that's on the Lord of the Rings, and you've got the armies coming in, and you've got the big Helm's Deep, this beautiful big castle with all your protective guards around it. And that's literally what's happening second by second. So the key aspect to that is that if you've got periodontal disease, and that could be gum recession, bleeding gums, you can take your pick, it's on a spectrum with regards to things to think about, is that's what's happening. And you want to know, am I winning the battle? So for me, who's, being incredibly healthy, eats a good diet, still, what we've learned on my genomics is my genomics are too pro-inflammatory. So they're likely to set off. And that means people like me with pro-inflammatory genetics have to work much harder to be able to keep that battle on the appropriate side. So for me, with reasonably established periodontal disease, I'm not going to get rid of it because my genes will always dictate that I'm always prone to it. What I've got to be able to do is be able to mitigate and slow down and control it as much as possible. And we've done a bloody good job over the last few years. Not easy. It's like everything. It's day to day, step by step. But I think what we're being able to do on an individual basis is start answering those questions, and then being able to start extrapolate that into different aspects of different disease processes. So I look at what we've done with DNA Smile is that it's not the only answer, it never is, but it's a major root causative answer that you cannot afford not to ask or not to go and investigate whenever you have it's certainly rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, I mean, Alzheimer's, you take your pick.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple of things then. We are told for good oral health that mouthwash gets rid of so much more than just brushing alone and all that kind of stuff. My view on that kind of thing is that actually that can be too sterile because we do need that bacteria in there. So what, from your perspective, maybe the toothpaste that we use, it has the fluoride and all that kind of stuff.
And again, I think we're looking at that. So there's a couple of things, and this has been the interesting thing about the transition and working with certain dentists. There's the fluoride debate, of course, and I think what is happening on that now is that there are new types of toothpastes coming out that are natural, that are in the science stacking up against fluoride. So I look at that and I think, okay, the only problem, Paul, is the price, like everything. So there's been some studies that looked at, of course, hydroxyapatite.
It's the same with organic.
Sorry.
It's the same with
of course, yeah. So we're looking at products that you can use that stack up scientifically, and of course it's just a gentle journey to transition people over there. Again, we could say the same with mouthwashes. From a point of view of, there is definitely evidence, certainly if you've got a type 2 diabetic or a hypertensive, where certain mouthwashes actually induce hypertension as a part of a mechanism, because what they're doing is actually destroying some of the bacteria on the back of the tongue. So some of the species on the back of the tongue are actually involved in taking nitrates from foods and changing them so that your body can utilize and make nitric oxide, which of course is a relaxant. So we're seeing that, and we're building all of this. So you're getting this picture of what would you do? And again, Paul, the fundamentals of this is that someone said to me, yeah, so all you're telling me is that you just need to sort of clean your teeth better. And the answer to that is, yeah, there is that is almost like the answer to everything. But how many things do we say about that in health that they just don't do it? You've got to sleep better, you've got to eat better, you've got to take the appropriate exercise, you've got to do stress reduction, and people don't do it. And so what you've got to be able to do is really dig deep into the fundamentals so that you can individualize that process for them. And one of the case studies that you'll see that I've just filmed for the online training is that the biggest intervention, you'll have this all the time, and many people listen to this all the time, is that your patients are complex. And sometimes you just need a test result to go, it's time for change. Yeah. This can't go on. And then the second case presentation I've just done was classically that. Here was a chap who was already had significant periodontal disease at 39. He was already under dentists, and they weren't really, in my opinion, again, I don't understand, maybe it's because they're just not reading the literature, Paul, they were doing nothing for it. Yeah. And I look back at that now and think, this guy's 39 and he's already having tooth loss because he's got super advanced periodontal disease. And so because he was coming to me for completely different things. And I said to him, I said, look, the biggest skill I had, the biggest win was be able to start taking down the narrative that actually maybe this is really problematic. And, this is something that is linked. And here's the testing that we should be doing. And we were able to transition him into that story to go, oh, okay. Yeah. And that's a problem. And so we had to build him on that.
But the challenge, I think, is that many people will brush their teeth twice a day, right? And many people will have a bit of mouthwash maybe sometimes. They do go to the dentist, they see the hygienist, but they still have the gum disease, the receding gums, the bleeding and so on. And so you go, okay, I'm doing all of that kind of daily housework that I need to do to keep it in place. But then there's no real talk about how do I reestablish a good microbiome in the gut? And also, we're seeing kids now, very young, when their milk teeth are dropping out rotten, not because their big ones are coming through, and then the big ones are coming through already diseased.
Yeah.
By poor, just basically way too much sugar, lots of nutrient deficiencies because of the way they're being fed and whatnot, right? Yeah. And so it kind of stems right the way back to there.
Absolutely.
And we're looking at these young kids, babies and up, that are on this path of oral destruction, if you like. And it's not the only thing that they're getting problems with, but it's certainly going to exacerbate later. We can't just turn that around by saying brush your teeth twice. We've got to establish that whole microbiome.
Just on DNA Smile, we've included 3 variants that is related to sweet tooth. And so we've done a couple of gene variants that are related to glucose sensing. And some people have genes that mean that the glucose centralin and the insulin receptors are a little bit sluggish. So actually they need more sugar before those receptors go, oh, okay, there's sugar in the system. And so we know they are susceptible to dental caries, losing the teeth. And we're also put another gene in there that senses bitterness. And again, you'll see this particularly in children where they are bitter tasters, i.e. meaning that, if you gave them vegetables, the bitter compounds in the vegetables are so strong for them. It's not that they don't want to eat the vegetables, it's completely overpowering for them. So you'll have these individuals who are more likely to have sweet tooth. And I think if I look at that, not only then, we're identifying what I think there's going to be a massive role for this testing is when you're starting to deal with athletes who may be susceptible to sweet tooth, pro-inflammatory. And of course, again, as I said to you before line, I'm just watching a Giro at the moment, and they are sucking sugar, gels like there's no tomorrow. Yeah. So you are going to see, and it's always a spectrum, isn't it? And the spectrum is determined with regards to the genomics. You're going to have some people who can eat whatever they want, and they probably teeth are pretty good, and you'll have some people who just really, regardless of how good they are, they're going to be susceptible, and they're going to have to work really, really hard to save their teeth. And unfortunately, I'm more down that way. which is, is disappointing. And if I hadn't learned this 5 years ago, I probably would certainly been having teeth removed now. But again, I've managed to completely reverse the process.
Yeah.
That's the wrong thing to say. You never completely reverse the process, but these periodontal pockets, these pockets where the gums come away, start to degrade away from the teeth, for me were very significant 5 years ago. Again, and the other thing, Paul, about this is that for the majority of the population, particularly as you get over 40, it's completely silent. It's asymptomatic. As it was for me, completely asymptomatic until that first tooth started showing. And then, you realize, oh my God, and you actually start really looking, you think, God, I have got gum recession and I have got gum recession. And yeah, my teeth do bleed sometimes when I'm flossing. And then you realize, God, this has been going on for years. And is that related?
What else?
Well, and again, so the point is that if you have the periodontal disease there, then your chances of having other systemic diseases are really very high. And so it's a question of, as I said, is that sometimes one of the major root causes is completely unrelated. But this is where joined up thinking in medicine matters so much, because if you can deal with one of those major root causes, you're putting people in just such a better position. Can I talk about the course?
Yeah, absolutely.
So look, what we tried to do is that we've recognized, I think, like everyone, that although it'd be great to be face to face, it increases the price and everything. And so what we've looked to do is really design a panel called DNA Smile. And it's got two sides of it. We've got the add-ons, which again, we talked about the mercury and the detoxification and the ApoE4 status as well. What I've tried to do is collaborate with lots of other people to build this DNA Smile. So it's a genetic test, really giving you I believe, beautiful insights with regards to, number one, the state of your mouth, but also how, and obviously your unique genomics that go there, but how that predisposes you for developing periodontal disease and other systemic diseases. And this fundamentally was born out because of that story of, my story, and then reading the literature, recognizing the relevance of this, and then looking back at those patients where I thought, oh crap, I should have done that with that patient. If only I knew now what I knew now, that if I could have used it then, which hindsight's a beautiful thing. So what we've done is we created a genomics panel that really looks at 20 genes. They are variants involved with some of these key biological processes that are innate immunity, acquired immunity, and inflammation, which is all about how does your defense force defend you from the outside world. We're looking at sweet tooth predisposition. We're looking at detoxification, lipids, and we've built that profile through, as you say, 20 gene variants. And what we've also done on that is that we've looked at the literature and we've been able to design the reports and the recommendations that go with the individualized genomic reports. So, we've been able to put all that together. It's all, with science. And what we've done as well is not only give you recommendations from a point of view of maybe you should be taking this person towards a Mediterranean diet, et cetera, et cetera. We're also saying next steps. And that next steps may be, this is what you need to do to tell a dentist, but also, and in this genotype, you need to be, monitoring CRP or blood spot fatty acids, so that we're saying, here's what we found, here's what the literature tells us, here's how we control it, and here's some of the things that you should do going forward. And so we built that into a report. What we've also looked to do is again, that I've been working with DNA Life for probably nearly 15 years now. And I think there's a lot of genomics companies out there. Some good, some not so good, depending on the training. These guys' training is very, very thorough. And as a part of that, we've built this course. So the course is comprehensively built. It's online. It's on a really nice user-friendly platform. And we've sort of divided it into 6 comprehensive modules. So, because what we're trying to do is that we recognize that genomics and using genomics can be morally problematic. So you've got to know what you need, what you've got to know. You've got to understand your genes. You've got to understand why you're using them. You've got to understand what it really means and what you can sort of say and what you can't say. And so what we've done is sort of we're grounding it in some overview of lifestyle genomics, the science and why we developed the test. And then we've got the geneticists taking you through some of the all the biological areas, they're relevant scientifically, but importantly, the applicability to your patient and to the report. So we've gone all through that. What we're talking about is here's the gene variant, here's what the relationships are with systemic disease and periodontal disease, and here's what you can do with regards to, what the report is telling you from what you need to do with your patients. And so we've designed all that. We've got all the intervention guidelines that we're doing from a point of view of diet and nutraceuticals, lifestyle, and importantly, the dental support, because with many of these patients, you're going to need to form relationships with the right dentists. And for me, again, certainly on case study 2, there wasn't a relationship for me. So I had to do it on my own because, as you say, he was already being treated, but they weren't interested. And again, still can't understand why, but it is what it is. I think we've all come up against that. And so, sometimes you might have to go on your own, but importantly, you're looking for that connection with a dentist that is thinking this way. And they're all, for me, many of these dentists now, whether it's biological dentists, Mercury dentists, or functional dentists, they can't ignore the science. And,
it's the same sort of challenge we have with doctors. Right, where they go, no, I'm not accepting that. Lyme, no, forget it. It's not. Yeah. It's not for us. It's not something we deal with. Doesn't exist. And you're going to get the dentists that are very conventional, but the ones that are more progressive are really going to want to know what this stuff's about. It's going to be appeal to them because it shows them that they're already interested in what the downstream effects are, and so they want to see that thing.
Yeah, and I think this is a question of.
Sorry, Pete, quick question. If someone's already had their genetics done, if they've got like, their full genome, can they use that? Can they just send you the?
Yeah, there would probably be some if those appropriate have been analysed. You may be able to look at that and make some assumptions from that. For sure.
But you couldn't send you it's not like you could send you the report and you could import it. And
again, I think, well, not unless you're going to pay me for a couple of days to analyze all of it. As you know, I think what I've always looked at, what we've done is that I think a lot of genomics reporting are very much raw data.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is saying, here's the gene, here's what it represents, here's what you're going to see. And so you're very, very clear on each gene. You're learning what that gene means. You're learning the differences on the variants. So you're very, very clear what that means. And I think, as you say, I think we've done a very clear guidelines on that. And even people who are new to this, I still think we've written it in enough. And I've done the first case study to show them what it looks like in practice. But even if you follow the guidelines and the reporting, you're still going to do a fundamental good job. You might not understand the second and third and fourth and fifth layers, because I'll do easy case studies, moderate and very advanced. The very advanced are the ones that are people who may have been looking at this 10, 15 years, have got a really thorough, deep understanding about how it all fits. But for many people, they're completely overwhelmed. So what we try to do is say, look, for these people at the beginning, here's the basics. It's real basic stuff. But it's enough for you to have an impact on the science, and we're seeing that clinically.
You want
absolutely. So we need to. It's like everything, Paul. We're also talking to some of the other oral diagnostics, and some of them again are trying to give us. And again, I speak to them a lot now, and what they're trying to do is give me, 50 bacteria. Where the reality, because they've got the PCR measures to be able to test them. But the reality of that is that there's probably 6 that are clinically relevant. So, you confuse people and you lose your patients.
Yep.
So what we're really after is clear, almost like stripped back. We don't need this. We want it really clear, really simple, stripped back so that your practitioner doesn't get lost and your patient doesn't get lost as well. So as you say, we will do, there's lots, as you say, 6 comprehensive modules. I've built and recorded 2 case studies so far. There's going to be another one that I'll do, and then I'll be continually loading onto you. We've built, as you say, a platform where there's an online community which I'll consistently load more stuff on. And then of course there's a certificate assignment. Yeah. So we want to make sure that you've got some degree of understanding, even if it's a basic, because like everyone, we've got to start somewhere, and we want you to understand that even if you do the basics well, you'll do a good job. But here's the thing, what I'd like to say to anyone here is that I had a conversation with everyone before I came on, because I knew I was going to speak to you. We're prepared to give anyone who's listening today to come on the course. We're prepared to do a genomics test and the course, and we'll do that for 150 quid. So you'll essentially be getting it for free.
Yeah.
If people are interested.
Around that sort of money anyway.
The test, well, again, if we're looking at the genomics test, we're looking at 150 quid.
Yeah.
So you'll essentially be getting the test, and what you'll be able to do is have that test ready for when the course comes out. So it's not that you'll be going into it raw. You'll be able to already look at that. So, we're prepared to look at this and think, I tell you what, from the people, because I've had lots of connections for you. We feel as though this is going to be a test that is going to be utilized by many people. So we can sort of be a bit ballsy and say, well, you know what, anyone listening now who wants to buy up now, we're good to go at that price.
So,
I think.
Okay, so it's for practitioners as opposed to an end user. However, once the course is up and running and you've got practitioners that have got their certification, anyone
can use that.
Anyone as a patient can go maybe find a practitioner.
So the whole point about this is that we want to make sure that people who have done our course have a good, can utilize the test because they've gone through robust training. So what they will do is that once they've done that test, that they have access to use that test whenever they want.
Right.
So
I'm looking at from an end user perspective. If someone's listening to this who's not a practitioner, which majority of people are going to be, there are going to be a lot of practitioners that do listen. But for the end user that's thinking, I'm an APOE4, I have inflammatory problems, where can I get that test? They can't come directly. They're going to have to find the practitioner.
They're going to have to find through, they're going to have to come through an accredited practitioner, Paul. And I just think it's just because it's just a bit of a diligence aspect, isn't it? You want to feel that if people have done your training, that the training's robust enough for them to go away and at least have some good understanding of how to start applying it. So people will have to go through a certified practitioner on this, which is just a due diligence.
Fine. So I'm going to say now, I'm going to give you 150 quid, and I'm going to do the course when it's ready. And so if anybody does want to get access to that test for themselves, they can contact me. And within, I'm guessing 3 months from this date, which is the 18th of May, 2021, hopefully I'll have done your course and be certified. And we can potentially start using it directly with patients.
Well, as you say, I think like anything, is that an experienced practitioner needs a big toolbox, and Absolutely. So you need to be able to know which tools do you need to pick out. What we found, and certainly what I found, is that for many of my patients, as I look back, not every one of them, because some people have fantastic teeth, it's never a problem. Yeah. And this is the key thing, it's identifying, I've got a bit of gum recession, my teeth do bleed. You're already answering the question that probably it's going on, and you really want to do the second and third steps then, because you might be thinking, and I developed rheumatoid arthritis 3 years ago, and I was like, well, is that being driven by your periodontal disease? It's definitely a question you've got to think about.
I'd love to see papers with things like MS and some of the other longer chronic issues, and what those sort of patients are suffering with orally.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this and there isn't, and there's a brand new paper that's just come out in Nature Reviews last month, and really looking at this. And the beauty of that one is that we're going to include that because it's almost all my work over 7 years. It's almost like these two guys have sort of wrote the course on this paper. I'm like, oh my God, this is like so perfect for understanding what I do over those last years. And any inflammatory led disease or disorder is going to have an underpinning. How much underpinning, of course, Paul, by what is happening orally. And what I would say about this is, what you've got to remember is that if there is your immune system is at war every second of every day. And if it's losing the battle, then that means that your immune system, inflammation, oxidative stress, it cannot be turned off. Yeah. It can't possibly be turned off, and you've got to try and dampen that down. And all you're doing there is...
Sorry, Pete, as you get older, it becomes more difficult.
absolutely.
You know, people are like, I see patients 50, 60, 70 years old, and they are inflamed, and you see it in all the markers, whether it be bloods, whether it be mold, organic acids, toxicity, whatever it is, and you can see it just in them. It's just inflamed, inflamed, inflamed. And even when you do lots of good work over a long period of time, you're never getting the traction you want. And which is why this is so interesting to me, because
I think what you also identified at the beginning is that, you know, you're I think we're exposed to a lot these days, and maybe we're not as robust as we should be. And so, you know, it's for some people, it's very difficult, isn't it? You'll have patients where it's an incredibly difficult struggle, and you've got to take a layer off, and you've got to take a layer off, and you've got to take a layer off. What we've been able to do, as you say, is that we believe this is a fundamental test going forward, because it sits there in your toolbox. You might not use it with every patient, but we're going to build you that process where number one, you've got to ask the question, you know, and be detailed with asking the question, because your patients at the moment won't recognize that what is happening in their mouth is probably in some way associated or in many ways causative to why they're coming to see you in the first place. And so until you get to that point and you've asked that question, it's almost like they don't make a relationship. Yeah. But then when you, as you say, you just seem to see the evidence, and you're like, holy cow. I mean,
it's also going to complicate. It's also going to complicate other things, like trying to detoxify other issues if they've got heavy metals or mold, or whether other toxicities that's sitting in them. If your immune is always trying to fight something else, your detoxification is always going to be compromised.
Everything's going to struggle, Paul.
Yeah.
And so it really is.
What I remember, just out of curiosity, how do we re-establish a good oral microbiome? Is there a way of doing that? Do we maybe...
Well, again, I think this is where we get the indication. So the reality is you've got to do and there's a couple of deeper layers to this that we're just getting into with the dentist. So I'll give you an example, is that I've just had some 3D x-rays of my jaw that are very informative. I had a root canal done about 3 years ago, that never had a root canal before. And I knew as soon as it was done, it wasn't quite right. And so the 3D x-rays has identified that I've got a small infection there. And so, you know, what the dentist is saying to me is that, you know, because you're quite healthy, that's probably not bothering you, but there might become a tipping point where you might need to do something about that.
But isn't it true? Sorry, Pete, is it not true that your immune can't get to your root canal, can't get to that sterilized area? So that sits in there. And it will release.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what we're learning. Again, I mean, Paul, it's opened a whole new world for me. What we're learning about root canals is probably 50% of root canals are infected. Yeah. And that is because just by the nature of bacteria, dentists can't fully clean the root out. It's impossible for them to do. So, you know, 50% of us who maybe had root canals have got some degree of infection that may be, in some people, the tipping point of why they're sick, or certainly a root causative. I mean, for me, that I think I'm pretty robust, you know, that I'm okay. But the reality is there's still an infection there. And again, when we're looking, you know, even if you look at something like the mechanisms of cardiovascular disease, you know, any infection is potentially changing your lipids because they're part of your immune system, and they're trying to protect you. So again, we're getting this much deeper and richer understanding of, holy cow, we need to think about this, we need to think that, and it's overwhelming for sure. But we're learning all this. What we're also learning again is that again, Dr. John Roberts, who again, one of the most foremost biological dentists, mate, incredible stuff that he's telling me about me. He believes that, you know, they've analyzed me, and we've just had the report back, and he thinks that I'm probably in low oxygen states at night. I might have some degree. I mean, me, mate, who's, you know, 10% body fat, you know, it's like, I can't possibly be having problems with low oxygen at night, because, you know, I'm about as trim as you're going to get for a 50-year-old bloke. And yet it's like, mate, it's got nothing to do with that. It's the fact that the way you sleep with your jaw is that, you know, you're affecting all that. And of course, anything where you're getting dry mouth at night, you're getting low oxygen states, is also very strongly implemented with the periodontal disease progression. So it's got nothing to do sometimes with what I'm doing, and that is good diet, a lot of phytochemicals, really good daily habits, you know, a lot of nutraceutical use, etc. So for me, it's this massive battle. And he's saying, you know, we may need to think about having to think about the way you sleep with your jaw, because what they're looking at is that you can see where your teeth are rubbed down here, because, you know, he even suggests I might be grinding my teeth at night. I'm like, that I can't be possibly doing that, you know, but it's like, oh, well, that sort of makes sense, because, you know, I do find it, certainly on the periodontal side, it's a struggle for me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just one of those susceptible people.
Right. It's such an interesting subject, the whole thing. I mean, it really is another layer to this whole functional medicine and looking at everything from a complete perspective, root cause kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's great what you've done.
So can I say to anyone, and particularly practitioners who are listening, that if they want to get in contact with me, and have you got my details, Paul?
I have. I'll put them in the show
Is
notes.
there any, I mean, I know you're going to put this out or whatever, but if they want to, if they feel as though this makes sense for them, I'd like to think it does, then we will absolutely offer them, you know, if they do the test for 150 quid, they can come on the course for free. Right. You know, I think that's the deal that we're looking to give. And of course that includes you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I will, we'll talk after this, and I'll pin you the money over, and we'll get it set up. And whenever the course is ready, let's get on it. But listen, in the meanwhile, thanks for coming on. Interesting, not just the information, but the thunderstorms and your newly found internet issues with thunderstorms in London. But good to see you again, mate. It's been a while, and now that this supposed COVID thing is on the way down, and we're allowed to see people, hopefully we'll bump into each other again at another conference, which we normally do. Kind of our sort of thing. But until then, where is the best place for people to get in contact with you personally if they want to do any work with you or ask you any questions?
Well, I think just to go onto our website, which has been revamped, which is if you put Functional Medicine Associates London just into a Google search, we'll probably come up quite high on the Google search there. So, but I mean, I'd love to leave my details, because you know, we'd like to get this course out.
We'll put them in the show notes, and also DNA Smiles in there, because there is a site up there for DNA Smile with just the basics up there to show what it's talking about. So people can around that as well. But mate, thanks as always for your time, and I will look forward to catching up again soon.
Pleasure.
Well, mate,
pleasure, Paul. Okay. Thank you.
Stay there. Don't move.